Welcome to a world where love isn't perfect, but it's real, where hearts break, heal, and sometimes meet again when they least expect it. Here, every story whispers of two souls crossing paths through power, pride, silence, and time. The past returns when it shouldn't, eyes meet when they can't, boundaries blur where they mustn't, and in the end, love itself must choose to close the door or open it one last time. These aren't fairy tales. They're reflections of what the heart hides and what time can't erase. So take a deep breath, feel every word, and let your heart listen. Because sometimes the truest stories are the ones we've lived, but never dared to tell. The moment he walked in, time folded in on itself. It wasn't supposed to be possible, not after years of silence and carefully built distance. Yet there he was, standing under the same light, in the same room where control mattered more than feelings. The air thickened, my breath turned uneven, and every rule I had learned about composure threatened to shatter. I had rehearsed professionalism, mastered calmness, but no one prepares for the day the past walks back into your present dressed in the scent of yesterday. Our eyes met, just for a moment, but it was enough. The rush of memories was merciless, soft laughter under rain, fingers brushing over unspoken promises, the quiet warmth of belonging that once felt unbreakable. Everything I had buried rose to the surface, raw and alive. The heart doesn't forget, even when the mind insists it must. He greeted everyone else before me. Maybe he was saving me for last. Maybe he didn't know what to say. The last time we spoke, our voices trembled with words that ended everything. Words we both regretted but couldn't take back. And now we stood in the same room, separated by years, by choices, by people who had no idea they were witnessing a silent storm. My boss had invited him to discuss a collaboration, unaware of the history that still pulsed between us like an open wound. He smiled politely when we finally faced each other, that kind of smile that hides more than it shows. I returned it the way someone returns a favor they never wanted to owe. Inside, my chest burned with 1,000 unsent letters. I remembered how he used to look at me, without walls, without fear. Now his gaze was guarded, careful, but still familiar. It scared me how much I still knew that look. The meeting began, and I tried to listen, tried to be present, tried to forget. His voice filled the room, steady, confident, the same voice that once whispered dreams into my ear. Every word he spoke cut deeper than it should have, not because of its meaning, but because of its sound. There was once a time I would close my eyes and let that voice guide me through the dark. Now, I kept my eyes open, forcing reality to hold its place. People spoke, plans were made, papers shuffled, but underneath it all, something else moved, a quiet current between two souls pretending to be strangers. Every now and then, our hands would reach for the same file, the same cup, the same pen. Each accidental touch was a reminder. Love never disappears, it only changes shape. When the meeting ended, the room emptied slowly, as if giving us time to decide what to do with the silence that followed. He lingered, so did I. Words hovered at the edge of my lips but refused to come out. It was him who broke it first. "You look different," he said softly, like he wasn't sure if he was allowed to notice. I wanted to tell him he looked the same, just older, steadier, maybe sadder. But instead, I said something simple, something safe. "It's been a long time." He nodded, the space between us filled with everything we didn't say. How he had left when things got hard, how I had stayed when it hurt most, how love had been both our cure and our poison. There was an apology in his eyes, one I had waited years to hear. But apologies, I learned, lose their meaning when they arrive too late. Still, something softened. Maybe it was forgiveness, or maybe it was exhaustion. I didn't want to hate him anymore. Hate takes too much strength, and I had already given him enough of mine. So I smiled, genuinely, this time. "I hope you're doing well," I said, and I meant it. He looked surprised, as if kindness was the last thing he expected from me. His reply was quiet, almost tender. "I am now." That sentence lingered long after he left. It was such a small thing to say, yet it echoed through me like a song I once loved but forgot how to sing. I wondered if he meant it, if seeing me again had stirred something buried deep beneath his calm exterior, or if it was just nostalgia playing tricks on two people who once knew how to love recklessly. That night, I couldn't sleep. Memories returned like waves, soft at first, then relentless. I thought of how we had fallen in love, two young souls chasing light in each other, believing love was enough to fix everything. I thought of the nights when silence was our only language, when holding hands said what words couldn't. I thought of the fight that ended it all, the sharp words, the pride, the tears that fell on a goodbye neither of us truly wanted. It was all still there, tucked away but never gone. Seeing him again reminded me that love doesn't vanish. It waits quietly in the background, patient and unresolved. It finds you in a crowded room, in the middle of a meeting, when you least expect it. And when it does, you realize that moving on was never about forgetting. It was about learning how to live with what remains. The next day, he sent a short message, just a thank you for the meeting, polite and professional. But at the end, there was a pause in words only I could read. It was good to see you. I stared at those words for a long time before replying, you too. That was all. No promises, no reopening of old wounds, just acknowledgement of what was, what is, and what will never be again. Sometimes love doesn't need to return to be real. Sometimes its power lies in its ability to stay silent, to exist in memory rather than reality. What we shared had once been pure, and even though time and circumstance had changed us, the truth remained. Some people leave, but the feeling never does. And that day, as I stood by the window watching the city move on, I realized something quietly beautiful. Closure isn't a moment, it's a decision, and mine came not from his return, but from the calm that followed it. I no longer needed him to stay or to explain. The past had returned, yes, but this time I was ready to let it leave. The air between us was thin that evening, almost fragile, like a thread stretched too tightly between two hands afraid to let go but too proud to hold on. He stood across the room, surrounded by voices and laughter, but all I could hear was the echo of silence, the kind that carries a heartbeat you still recognize, no matter how much time has passed. Our eyes met for a second too long, and in that single glance, every memory we had tried to bury rose quietly to the surface. He looked the same, only calmer, more measured. There was a steadiness in his presence now, something that once drew me to him, but now felt unreachable. I smiled, polite and controlled, the way people do when the world is watching. He smiled back, the kind of smile that hides emotion behind manners. No words were exchanged, but that look, that one silent connection, said everything we couldn't afford to say. The room carried a chill of formality. Glasses clinked, music whispered from somewhere distant, and laughter floated through the air like smoke. Yet beneath the noise, there was a quiet storm brewing between us. Every gesture, every glance, every breath was a conversation we weren't allowed to have. I could feel his gaze linger when he thought I wasn't looking, and I wondered if he could still read me the way he used to through stillness, through eyes, through restraint. He approached once halfway before someone called his name. He turned back, the moment slipping through our fingers like sand. It was always like that with us, almost, but not quite. The unspoken had always been our language. We used to speak in touches and pauses, in the space between words where truth lived quietly. And now, surrounded by people who knew nothing of our history, we were fluent again in that silence. When the meeting began, I tried to focus on the presentation, on numbers and plans that mattered only on paper. But his voice, steady, composed, deliberate, filled the room, and it was impossible not to listen. It carried the same warmth, the same pull, but now it was lined with distance. He spoke as though the past never happened, as though we were two professionals exchanging ideas, not two souls who had once known each other in ways words could never capture. There was a moment when he turned toward me, asking a question directly. Our eyes met again, and for a heartbeat, everything stilled. I answered calmly, my voice even, my expression composed. Inside, though, my pulse raced. I could see in his eyes the same struggle, the same push and pull between duty and desire, between pretending and remembering. That kind of tension doesn't need words. It breathes on its own. Afterward, people mingled, hands shook, polite laughter filled the air. I found myself near the corner, pretending to check messages just to avoid the weight of his gaze. But he came closer. I could feel it before I saw it. The subtle shift in energy, the faint scent of something familiar, the awareness that he was near. When I finally looked up, he was standing only a few feet away. "Good to see you again," he said softly, almost hesitant. The sound of his voice that close stirred something I had locked away long ago. I nodded, my smile small, restrained. "It's been a while," I replied, keeping my tone even, my heart anything but. He looked at me with eyes that still remembered. There was something unguarded in them for a moment, something that felt dangerously close to longing. "You've changed," he said. It wasn't a compliment nor an observation. It was a confession. I wanted to tell him he hadn't, that despite everything, despite time, distance, and everything that came between us, he was still the same person who once knew how to make me feel seen. But instead, I said nothing. Some truths are too fragile to be spoken aloud. The conversation stayed shallow, small talk wrapped around years of emotion neither of us dared to touch. Every smile was calculated, every pause deliberate. The world around us kept moving, colleagues laughing, glasses raised. But inside that brief exchange, there was a different rhythm, one that belonged only to us. He reached for his drink, and our hands brushed. Just a touch, accidental, fleeting, but it was enough. 1,000 memories unfolded in that instant, of warmth, of laughter, of tears, of everything that once was. I saw it in his eyes too. That brief surrender to what we once had, followed immediately by restraint. It was painful and beautiful at once, the quiet ache of remembering something you can never return to. We spoke a little longer, both of us pretending to be comfortable, both knowing it was a lie. He mentioned his work, his travels, his life. I nodded, listened, smiled when appropriate. The conversation ended as easily as it began, with polite goodbyes and promises to stay in touch. Promises both of us knew would never be kept. When he walked away, the room suddenly felt colder. I watched him leave, each step pulling a piece of memory with it. For a long moment, I just stood there, caught between the past and the present, wondering how something once so full could now feel so empty. Later, as I stepped outside, the night air hit differently. It carried the same ache that used to follow our goodbyes, only softer now, quieter. Maybe that's what healing looks like, not forgetting, but remembering without breaking. I realized then that what remained between us wasn't unfinished love. It was the echo of it, lingering quietly, respectfully, as if even the memory knew its place. We hadn't spoken of the past. We hadn't said anything that mattered. Yet somehow everything that needed to be said was already understood. That's the cruel beauty of unspoken tension. It says the most without ever using words. And as I walked away into the night, one truth settled gently in the heart that had once belonged to him. Sometimes silence is not emptiness. It's what remains when love learns to breathe quietly. It began quietly, the way storms do, too subtle to notice until you're already standing in the rain. It was supposed to be simple, just another professional chapter, one where emotions had no place and boundaries were lines no one dared to cross. But life doesn't always obey reason. Sometimes it tests the lines we draw to protect ourselves, and love, real, inconvenient, uncontrollable love, finds a way to seep through the cracks. He wasn't just another face in the office. He was someone whose presence changed the air. Calm, composed with a kind of authority that carried both weight and warmth. The kind that made people listen, not out of fear, but out of quiet respect. Every meeting, every conversation, felt like walking a tightrope between admiration and something far more dangerous. It started with words, ordinary ones, exchanged over deadlines and late-night reports. There was a rhythm to our conversations, a careful balance of professionalism and something unspoken that hovered just beneath the surface. A shared glance here, a half smile there. Nothing wrong, nothing explicit. But in those brief moments, the world seemed to still, and something in my chest stirred that shouldn't have. He had power, not the kind that commands, but the kind that influences. The kind that makes people want to be better just by being near him. I tried to remind myself of that, tried to keep things where they belonged. But the heart doesn't care about rules. It only knows recognition, and mine recognized him in a way I couldn't explain or escape. There was a night when we stayed late at the office, the city outside dark and quiet, the soft hum of computers filling the silence. We talked about everything except what mattered: dreams, mistakes, the choices that shaped us. He spoke about loss, about how success sometimes demands solitude. There was something raw in his honesty, something that disarmed the walls I had so carefully built. And when he looked at me then, really looked, I knew that this was no longer something I could keep contained. But boundaries existed for a reason. There were expectations, reputations, unspoken rules. We both knew what was at stake. Still, the pull between us grew harder to ignore. Meetings became charged with quiet tension. Words carried double meanings. Every decision, every exchange, was a test of restraint. It was maddening, the constant push and pull between wanting and knowing better. I told myself it was admiration, that what I felt was simply respect, but deep down, I knew better. There's a kind of connection that logic cannot undo, one that threads itself into your thoughts when you're least prepared. He had become that, an ache beneath composure, a question that had no right to exist. One evening, after a particularly long day, we found ourselves alone again. The office was nearly dark, only the glow from the city filtering through the glass. I stood by the window, and he came to stand beside me. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The silence was heavy, full of words neither of us could say aloud. Finally, he broke it, not with confession, but with something gentler. "You make it hard to keep things simple," he said quietly. The words hung in the air, fragile and forbidden. My heart ached at their honesty. I wanted to answer, to admit that simplicity had vanished long ago. But I couldn't. We both knew that once truth was spoken, there would be no taking it back. So instead, I said, "We both know the lines." He nodded, a faint, knowing smile tugging at his lips, and we both keep crossing them. There it was, the truth, laid bare in the dim light. Not accusation, not regret, just acknowledgement. It was dangerous, that kind of honesty. It lived in the space between control and surrender, where pride tried to win but love refused to lose. After that night, something shifted. We didn't speak of it again, but the air between us was never the same. Every glance became a confession. Every word a careful step along a fault line that could crack at any moment. He was always composed, always in control, but I could see the flicker of something in his eyes that mirrored my own conflict. We were two people pretending to be unshaken while the ground beneath us trembled. There were days I wanted to walk away completely, to reclaim the simplicity that once existed before him, but distance only sharpened the ache. I learned that love, when denied, doesn't fade. It deepens quietly, feeding on restraint, growing stronger in silence. There's power in that kind of love, but also pain, the kind that humbles and teaches all at once. He never crossed the line fully, and neither did I. Maybe that's what kept it real. It wasn't about possession or defiance. It was about something deeper, a recognition of souls bound by timing that was never kind. What existed between us was built on what couldn't be said, on moments that lived between breaths. Once, after a long meeting, our hands brushed as we reached for the same document. It was a fleeting touch, but it felt like a lifetime condensed into a second. I saw it in his eyes, the same realization that this was something that couldn't and shouldn't be, yet somehow was. We both pulled back instantly, the air between us electric and silent. No apology followed. None was needed. Time moved on, projects ended, people changed roles, life did what it always does. It separated what it couldn't understand. We drifted naturally, politely, the way people do when they choose peace over passion. And yet, every now and then, in some quiet moment, I would catch myself thinking of that space between us, that delicate line we never dared to cross but always stood beside. I learned then that love isn't always loud. Sometimes it's found in restraint, in the strength to care without claiming, to feel without demanding. Power and pride may define the world we live in, but love, the kind that endures quietly, lives beyond them. Years later, when our paths crossed briefly again, the recognition was still there. A soft nod, a knowing smile, no words. It was enough. We had lived our story between the lines, and that was where it belonged. And as I walked away that final time, I realized something that stayed with me long after. The most honest kind of love doesn't always ask to be fulfilled. Sometimes it just asks to be remembered. The message came on an ordinary afternoon, the kind that passes without meaning until something shifts it forever. It was simple, just a few words asking if there was time to meet. No explanations, no apologies, just an echo from the past that still lived quietly inside me. For a moment, I didn't move. The world seemed to pause, waiting for me to decide whether to open an old door or leave it sealed. But the truth is, when love has lived once, even in ruins, it never truly disappears. We met at a small cafe tucked away from the noise of the city, the same one where we used to go when the world felt softer. I arrived early, not because I was eager, but because I didn't trust my composure. The years had taught me control, how to smile through storms, how to survive the emptiness he once left behind. But no amount of time could erase the weight of a love that had changed everything. When he walked in, the air shifted. He looked older, not just in face but in presence, wiser, maybe, or simply more tired. His eyes searched for something familiar, and when they met mine, the years between us seemed to dissolve. There was warmth there, but also hesitation. We greeted each other like two people meeting for the first time, careful, polite, hiding everything that once burned uncontrollably. The conversation began with safe topics: work, travel, the passing of time. We spoke like strangers, pretending not to remember the nights we had built dreams together, or the silence that followed when those dreams collapsed. Yet beneath every word, there was an undertow of everything unsaid. It wasn't long before it surfaced. "I never stopped thinking about you," he said quietly, his fingers tracing the edge of his cup. Not once. The confession hit harder than I expected. There was truth in his voice, the kind that can't be performed. For a second, I almost forgot how to breathe. I wanted to ask why, after all this time, he had come back. Why reopen what we had both buried? But I already knew the answer. Some loves don't die, they wait. They linger in shadows, patient, persistent, waiting for courage or weakness, whichever comes first. He spoke of regret, of choices that cost him peace. I listened, not as the person who once loved him, but as someone who had learned to live without him. I remembered the fights, the pride, the endless nights of trying to hold something that kept slipping away. Love had once been our refuge, but also our ruin. To return to it would mean risking everything I had rebuilt. Yet as I looked at him, the heart whispered what reason tried to silence. Maybe this time would be different. There was a pause, long, heavy, filled with meaning. He reached across the table, his hand stopping halfway, uncertain. I watched it tremble slightly, and for a moment I wanted nothing more than to take it, to erase the distance, to surrender once more to what felt inevitable. But then I remembered the aftermath, the hollow quiet that follows when love breaks too loudly. "I forgave you a long time ago," I said finally, my voice calm but trembling underneath. His eyes softened. "Then why does it still feel like I'm asking you to?" "Because forgiveness isn't the same as forgetting." I had let go of anger, but the scars still whispered stories. Love, when it's real, doesn't vanish. It leaves imprints that time can't fade. I told him that. He nodded, looking down, as if the truth itself was too heavy to meet. We sat in silence, not awkward but fragile, like standing at the edge of something vast. He looked up again, his expression searching. "Do you think we could ever start again?" The question hung there, daring an answer that could rewrite everything. My heart twisted. There was a part of me that wanted to say yes, to believe that love could be reborn after destruction, that we could find each other again in a world less cruel than before. But another part knew better. Some fires once extinguished aren't meant to be relit. They're meant to be remembered for their warmth, not their burn. I don't know. I said softly, "Maybe we're not who we were anymore." He smiled sadly. Maybe that's the point. That night, long after the cafe had closed and the world had grown quiet, his words echoed in my mind. Maybe that was the point. That people change, that love evolves, that sometimes what was broken could be built differently. But as I lay awake, I realized something deeper. It wasn't about starting again. It was about choosing peace over passion, truth over fantasy. Love had taught me that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is walk away. Again, but this time without anger, without regret. The next morning, I met him once more, not to rekindle, but to close the circle. We walked through the park where we had once shared endless conversations about forever. The trees had changed, grown taller, older, just like us. There was a stillness in the air, the kind that comes when something finds its ending gracefully. He turned to me as we reached the corner where paths diverged. "I'll always love you," he said simply, no drama, no tears. Just truth, and for the first time, I believed it without needing to hold it. I smiled, a real one this time, I know. We didn't hug. We didn't say goodbye. We just stood there, two people who had loved, lost, and learned. Then we walked in opposite directions, peacefully, quietly, free. Sometimes love doesn't ask for another chance. Sometimes it asks for understanding. And in that moment, I understood what closure truly meant. It wasn't the end of love, but the acceptance that love can exist even when it no longer needs to. And that was enough, because the heart doesn't always choose between forgiving or forgetting. Sometimes it simply chooses to remember without pain. If this story touched something inside you, don't let it fade away. Like, share, and subscribe for more real stories that remind us how love can heal, haunt, and change us forever. Every episode is a heartbeat, a piece of truth that belongs to all of us. Turn on the bell icon and stay with us, where every ending still carries a pulse of love, and every beginning waits for you in the next story.